Is the Canadian government cooking the books? As well as, are we going to see interest rates come down in 2024? All this and more with our good friend and mortgage broker, Mr. Dion Beg, right after this. Here we are, my friends, with our favorite mortgage broker in all of the land, Mr. Dion Beg. How are you, my man?
Hey, Gary. I'm great, man. How you doing?
I am doing excellent. So we're filming this December 4th, just a couple of days before we don't want to say a rate increase or decrease or hold because we don't know, but
announcement. I'll say it. It's a hold. It's going to be a hold.
Yeah.
All the data says it's going to be a hold.
There you have it, my friends. So you don't need to do anything on December 6th, anything more. You know it's going to be a hold, and we've talked about that in depth and I think in our last video because and you enlightened me on this too. We'll most likely have a hold on December 6th. Perhaps have a hold in January, and then you reminded me this is big. This is actually important to you as a consumer. There's no announcement in February. The next one after that would be March, right?
That's right, yeah. So no meeting in February. Therefore, there's going to be no change in February. We know that. The question is, what's going to happen December, January? December is pretty much a given, no change. And if this holiday season comes out as predicted, which is very weak, and we're already seeing it, Gary, with layoffs in the retail sector, then it's likely that January will also be a no change. And therefore February no change, with a no meeting. So that'll be as you're getting to. I'll let you take the punchline here. How many months?
I can't remember. Is it 6 months? Is it
6 months?
Yeah,
it would be. It would be 6 months in a row, right? And so we haven't seen a 6 month in a row pause ever. Since this whole rate increasing started, we saw 4 months in a row at the start of 2022, which saw a significant jump in pricing in real estate again. And so the logic would say that if we get 6 months in a row come February, March, especially going into a spring market, which is traditionally the market in which Canadians come out of hibernation and say, okay, you know what? We've been thinking about buying a house. Now's the time to go. It could all sort of converge at the right time.
That's right. Okay, so what are we going to jump into on today's call? We're going to finish our conversation on immigration. There's some interesting info that we didn't touch on last call. GDP growth, or is it? Or are we growing? The big banks and their profits and in layoffs is what we're seeing across the board, let alone just the banks and everyone else, and in the unemployment numbers. So let's circle back to immigration and who are we really growing with immigration, with the GDP in that conversation? Talk to us what's going on there. Sure. And who are we targeting at this moment?
Okay, so first we should start with getting some baseline numbers. So everybody's seen the headlines in terms of immigration growth this year. 1 to 1.2 million new people moved to this country in that period of time, the last 12 months. And what that translates to is a 3% increase in population. Okay, so 3% increase in population. Now, when it comes to GDP, we had just last week the Q3 report coming out for Q3, and it came in at a contraction of, I think it was 1.1% contraction. So we went backwards, or what they sometimes call negative growth we experienced in Q3. That should be no surprise. Now, we were all waiting for this because Q2 had also a contraction, a small one of 0.2. And the definition, do you remember the definition of a recession, Gary?
2 quarters in a row. If you got declining numbers, we're in that recession.
2 quarters in a row. Exactly. 2 quarters in a row of decline, economic decline, means we're in a recession. So when that print came out just last week, after the Q2, then we're like, okay, well, there it is. We have 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. But no, there was a catch. You see, the government at the same time said, back in Q2 when we said we had a contraction of 0.2, we got it wrong. We have revised it. And so that was actually a positive 1.4. So we don't have 2 negative quarters because we changed our reporting on that Q2 report.
Yeah.
So
there's a phrase out there, and I'll just say it because I know people are thinking, are we cooking the books, Dion? What are we doing here?
Yeah, I wish that I got to do those retakes in my life, Gary,
Yeah, yeah.
especially when it comes to my wife.
What?
But
No, not for the
no,
choice of
the
your wife. You
mistakes I
mean,
make that my wife catches, I'm like,
yeah,
"Oh, no, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that on Tuesday. I didn't.
yeah,
What I meant to say on Tuesday was."
yeah. Here's how I should have said it.
We don't get that, us husbands.
No.
But yeah, so yeah, we get these this Q2. It's revised, so therefore it's not as bad as we said. But I want to overlay this with the population growth, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to give you a very simple example of why, regardless of even if we had a positive 2.5% growth so far this year, why it's still a negative. Okay, and this is the example. Let's say you run a business and you have 100 employees, and for simplicity, let's say your profit for the year was $100. Okay, very simple. Now, let's say next year you hire three more employees, three more people, and that same year that you hire three more people, your profit is $101. Okay, so when you look at profitability, you are up, but when you look at profitability per capita or per employee, you're actually down.
Mm.
And so, even with a positive 2.5% growth, which we don't have, we have negative growth in Q3, but even with a positive growth of 2.5%, we're backwards because population grew by 3%, right?
Right.
So, GDP per capita, if we were to use that measure, which in my mind is a very logical measure, especially in the immigration environment that we're in, we're actually negative. And you don't need the government to tell you, I'll tell you, we're in a recession if you measure it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Okay.
that's and I love when we start peeling the onion away and looking at some of the factors or the fundamentals of that type of thing. And circling back to the immigration piece, I know you had sent me a message on what the Canadian government is or should be prioritizing
Mm,
who is immigrating to Canada. We've talked about this at length in some of our other videos. We need to produce, according to CMHC, if I have my numbers correctly, an additional or 500,000 new homes per year. We've never met that for the next
correct.
7 years. So who are we
Correct.
prioritizing at this moment for immigration?
Yeah. So the good news is logic is prevailing here. And yes, they are targeting immigrants with construction skills, right?
Right.
So they're trying to bring people into this country who can actually build this country, right? With their two hands. And it's a divergence from, I think, what most, especially developed nations, have been trying to attract as immigrants for the last 2 to 3 decades, where we're trying to attract people in the IT and sciences fields, sort of like the brains trust, importing smart technical people to work in the services and science industries, financial services industries. And so we're now diverting to what I think is a much more practical approach where, okay, where are all these people going to live? Let us be bringing people to this country who have the skills to actually construct the housing we need over the decades ahead.
Yeah, imagine that. That just makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. You're right. A lot of other
Yeah,
countries
and
do the same.
anecdotally, Gary, like 30 years ago when you and I were picking our university majors, right? I think everybody was being pushed into the IT world. IT was a very big thing back
Right.
then, in the 90s, as well as financial services or anything sort of white collar. But what I can tell you, in the last 5, 10 years, I've seen people sort of re-engage with the idea that if my child grows up to be a plumber, an electrician, okay, or a tradesperson of some kind, which had been kind of pushed to a secondary category, right? I found a lot of people now redefining that and saying, no, this is actually very skilled labor, and I am encouraging my children to go into the trades. And I think that's a great idea in the current
Oh,
market in particular.
absolutely. So many opportunities. We all know it. We all know it. We're all surrounded by them. Try hiring any one of those trades right now. It's months and months and months to wait for that, and a huge need for that. I know many tradesmen that are looking for tradespeople that they're looking to hire, and they
Yeah, right.
just can't find personnel to
Yeah,
fill.
it's that
And
market right now. Yeah.
yeah,
And I don't think that's going to change for the years ahead based on the supply issue, right?
Well, that's just it. If we're short that many homes and we need to build that many homes, it takes skilled labor, skilled tradespeople to build that. All right, let's talk about our favorite topic, the big banks making money, because that's what they seem to do.
So
What's going
yeah,
on
so in
here?
the last week we had a bunch of major banks come out with their profit statements, and unfortunately, they were not as profitable as they had originally hoped. You know, they were only at 4 billion as opposed to 5 billion. Boohoo for them, right? Nobody really cares except for their shareholders.
Yeah,
Well, I shouldn't say that. Also, their employees do care, right?
yeah.
And unfortunately, this has translated to layoffs amongst some of the major banks, downsizing their staff because economic activity is down and they don't need as many people with hands on deck right now.
Yeah, that's right. And as you just mentioned, it's not because the banks are in trouble. Uh, it's really the lack of work or the lack of activity coming into those banks because consumers are doing a lot less than they were, say,
Yep.
12 months ago. Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's one component. The other component, Gary, is a thing that they call the capital loss reserves. Okay,
Okay.
and let me just touch on this for a minute. So every bank, when they make a loan, they have to set aside a certain amount of their capital for the eventuality of a possible default on that loan, right? So that if that borrower doesn't repay, that they're not going to be in trouble at the institutional level. And so what we've seen from major banks is across the board a near doubling of the reserves for those potential credit losses. And so if they're reserving this money, which otherwise would be put out into economic activity, then they can't make money on that money, so that it's now, because it's now sitting in reserve, and so that's going to reduce their profitability. So that's one thing. The other thing that we should take from that is, if these major institutions who have a lot more economic data than you or I have are setting aside even more money for potential credit losses, it means that their vision for the next 6 to 12 months in the Canadian economy is a very negative one. They believe that Canadians may be hurting to the point that there may be more credit defaults in the next 6 to 12 months.
Right. Interesting stuff. Okay. Unemployment. Let's not that we want to carry on this theme, but unemployment. Those numbers are starting to shoot up, which is what we've been looking for from an inflation standpoint and bringing everything in check there because that's just the way that the flow of economics
Yeah,
works.
bad news
Um,
is good news, right?
yeah, yeah,
Unfortunately.
exactly. And we've had some big time or some long stapled businesses either go into receivership in the last couple of months or start to lay off. And the big one at the beginning of it is Canadian Tire is starting to lay off some of their workforce.
Yeah, so again, a downsizing of around 3% of their staff. It's 200 people, which doesn't sound like a hell of a lot, but that's, 200 families who are
Hmm.
now without that income in their household, and that, obviously has a knock-on effect outside of that family in terms of the decisions they make with their spending dollars. And I hope that whomever is laid off during this time hopefully they get back on their feet quickly. And I'm happy that we do have some kind of a social network, safety net here in Canada, that allows people to get back on their feet. But especially running up into holiday season, which is the season that most retailers bank on for the time where they're going to get a bump in sales and profitability. If they're making these decisions prior to holidays, then in my mind, things must be quite bad.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I read last night, and I'm just trying to confirm it at this moment, but we've also read that CBC is looking at doing something very similar, and that might be based on the fact if I'm just to kind of think out loud on that, the less revenue coming in, less companies choosing advertisement slots and things like that. So we got to look out for that. And of course, we've had two kind of staple employers going to receivership or file for bankruptcy in the last little while. One being Bad Boy Furniture, and the other being
Yeah.
Mastermind Toys. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, I know I've been a customer of both. Especially the second one. My kids, we can't walk past a
Yeah.
Mastermind Toys without my kids dragging me in there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's unfortunate that these things, which have become part of most Canadians' lives, are now under receivership, liquidation, and potential bankruptcy.
Okay. It's all part of it, and then this is what Deanna and I are here to talk about is just the reality of where we are currently, and looking for any sort of glimmer of hope. Well, when things go down, things do have to come up eventually. We get that, but let's talk about how history's kind of taught us some lessons with what happened in the U.S. Back as far as 2008, and perhaps how it might be somewhat different even in today's economic climate, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So as you know, as anybody in Canada will tell you, we are very much tied at the hip to the United States. Obviously, we're geographically very close, and we do a bunch of trade between the nations. Also, our economic policies have been, again, very much tied to the hip because a change in one country without a change in the other generally results in some kind of a divergence, in particular with the value of the currencies, which then impact trade between the nations, and therefore we run the risk of what they call import inflation, where we have to pay more Canadian dollars for US goods, which then ultimately pushes inflation up again. But there may be there's a particular economist, Dr. Sherry Cooper, who's come out to say that the next 12 months in the year 2024, there may be a time, an unusual time, where Canada starts to choose to diverge their policy from that of the United States. And there's a couple of reasons behind that. And they do go back, as you said, Gary, sort of to 2008, that global financial crisis, and what happened, and what happened in the States, what happened here, as well as the types of mortgages that are available. So let me spend a minute explaining that. So in 2008, as probably anybody over the age of 25 will probably remember, the world ended financially, in that there was a whole bunch of issues that really started out of the United States lending and sort of poor lending strategies and governance, which led to really bad mortgages being written and a whole bunch of people not being able to pay their mortgages back. Okay, so this is the simple version of 2008, which had a massive knock-on effect around the world. So what happened in the United States after the global financial crisis is, across the board, prices of houses dropped by about 25%. Do you remember the stories, Gary, of homeowners just walking into the bank and just handing over the keys and saying, "Here, bank, take my house back. I'm out of here. I owe way more than the property's worth."
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And a sidebar, one of my favorite movies and educational piece is The Big Short. So if you haven't watched that, go watch that. It's really enlightening for sure.
Yeah, great movie, and well told and educational, right?
Yeah.
At the same time. But yeah, so people were handing back their keys, and that's because in the States there's the prevalence of a type of loan called a non-recourse loan, which is hard to find in Canada. I've never written a non-recourse loan mortgage in Canada, and so what this means is, if you're in that situation where you bought a house, and let's say you bought a house in Florida in 2006 for 300 grand, and then the price has dropped to 200 grand, but you owe 280,000, then you walk into the bank, you hand over the keys, and if you were in Canada and you did that, then that debt would follow you and be on your credit report for many, many years to come. Non-recourse means when that happens, they can't pursue you personally. It's just
Mm.
a bad debt and it's done with, right? So because of that, many people in the US decided to do that, and therefore just walk away from these houses, and that's where these house prices dropped dramatically. In Canada, that didn't happen because Canadians knew that if they did that, that would hurt them long term. That would follow them on their credit report. That would disallow them from being able to purchase again in the near future, right? And so we didn't have this significant drop of, say, 25%. In fact, it was probably around 9 to 10% that happened in the year 2008-9. But the crazy thing is, Gary, that was all made up for within about a year and a half. So we didn't see the massive drop that we saw in the States, and the extended period of time that it took to regain that value. So we didn't have that huge drop. Okay. All this to say, house prices in Canada are significantly higher than house prices in the United States, for one of the key reasons being we didn't have that massive drop in price in 2008-9 that they had in the United States. And that's really when we started to diverge in house pricing. If you were to look back at house price charts, 2008-9 was the era, right? So understanding that, couple that with the types of mortgages that we have in the length of mortgage terms that we have in Canada versus the States. And we've spoken about this before. In Canada, most Canadians will take a 5-year term, which means you get a particular rate for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, you're a free agent. Everything's negotiable again. In the States, it's not 5 years, it's 30 years. You have certainty for 30 years that is your rate, that is your payment. And so, as you're seeing in the news and the newspapers, all these renewals coming up and all these Canadians facing the reality that they're jumping from 3 to 6% in interest rates. In the States, that's not happening. Nowhere near to the same extent that it's been happening in Canada. So for these reasons, the Canadian consumer is feeling the pain of these interest rates much faster and much deeper than those in the United States, right? And they've borrowed a lot more because the house price is worth so much more. So again, they're feeling it much harder and faster. So this is why there is speculation that we could in fact be dropping rates in advance of the United States in 2024.
Interesting. See, there might be a shimmer of hope here. And that's based on, not to say we need to keep up with the Joneses or the United States, but we need to be aligned with your economy 97.5% of the time. How's that sound? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And again, we would have to watch the currency valuations if we were to do that, because again, if what it results in is inflation again, then we're back to where we started, and nobody wants that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's that side effect too. If we start dropping rates faster than the States, it's going to cost us much more to buy that US dollar, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those weird things that happens alongside of it, but that's part of it. And that's why it's a constant, there's no one button, set it and forget it. You've got to constantly watch it. So, as much as we make fun of our current finance minister and leadership, it's not a job that I would want to take on at all. It's a science behind it, right?
I remember economics 101 back in the Queensland University of Technology in 1997, where my professor stood up and said, economics is a science and it's a living science, and meaning that you make one change here, it impacts something else. Something happens in the world tomorrow, a war, a political change that changes everything else. So yeah, you're chasing a moving target, and you're right, Gary. I wouldn't want the job. I do love, being a talking head on the job, though. It's very easy.
Yeah, that's much easier. We'll be pundits for sure. Yeah. For sure.
Armchair pundits. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll leave with this. I won't go deep into it. It'll just be a comment, and perhaps we talk about this next week. But here's my question for our viewers. Could gold be giving us any hints into our real estate market? So there you go, my friends. We'll do some research more on that next week. But Dion, remind us how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, kangamortgage.ca or Instagram at the Dion Beg.
There you have it, my friends. So that's Mr. Dion Beg. Of course, I'm Gary McGowan. We'll see everybody in the next episode. Goodbye for now.
Thanks, Gary. See you.